For 19 days, nobody knew where Elisa Lam was. Then a hotel worker climbed onto the roof because guests were complaining about the water. He opened one of the hotel's water tanks and found her body inside. 3 weeks earlier, she had walked into an elevator. A camera recorded what happened next. A few minutes of footage, her pressing buttons, stepping in and out of the doorway, looking down a hallway the camera couldn't see. That video would turn her death into one of the most debated mysteries on the internet. But there's a problem with the mystery. The official evidence doesn't say she was murdered. It says she drowned. By accident. So how did a 21-year-old woman get onto that roof, into that tank, and disappear without anyone seeing her? This is case file number 008, Elisa Lam. This is what the evidence actually tells us. Elisa Lam was 21 years old, a Canadian university student from Vancouver, born Lam Ho Yi, traveling alone on a West Coast trip, trains, buses, a camera, a blog. She posted photos from the San Diego Zoo. She bought books in downtown Los Angeles. A bookstore manager who spoke with her that last day remembered someone outgoing, friendly, talking about whether the books would be too heavy to carry. She called her parents every day. That matters, because this was not presented at the time as someone trying to vanish. She had a checkout date, a next destination, Santa Cruz, a family expecting the next call. On January 26th, she arrived in Los Angeles and checked into a downtown hotel, then operating as Stay on Main, the building better known as the Cecil. She was first placed in a shared room on the 5th floor. After 2 days, her roommates complained about what the hotel later called odd behavior. She was moved to a room of her own. We are not going to turn that into a ghost story. We are going to treat it as what it was. A young woman traveling alone, whose last days included documented signs of distress, and a family who still expected her to come home. January 31st was supposed to be checkout. Hotel staff who saw her that day said she was alone. Then the daily call home didn't come. Her parents contacted Los Angeles police. In early February, they flew down to help search. On February 6th, LAPD's Robbery Homicide Division held a news conference. Detectives described a 21-year-old Canadian woman last seen at the Cecil Hotel on Main Street. They called the disappearance suspicious. They asked the public for help. Police searched what they legally could: her room, common areas. Dogs were brought through the building, including, according to later reporting, the roof. They did not find her. A week later, still nothing. And then investigators released the last known recording of Elisa Lam. On February 13th, LAPD released elevator surveillance from the hotel. It is only a few minutes long. It became one of the most watched pieces of footage in modern true crime. Watch it as evidence, not as a horror clip. Elisa Lam enters the elevator. She is alone in the frame. She presses buttons, and more than one. The car does not behave the way a normal ride would. She steps toward the hallway. She looks out. She steps back in. She moves her hands. At one point, she appears to hide in the corner. The doors stay open longer than they should. She leaves. Eventually, the doors close. The internet filled in the missing piece. Someone chasing her. Someone just out of frame. A glitch. A ritual. An edit. Here is the discipline this case requires. The camera does not show who or what she was reacting to. It shows a young woman alone in an elevator, behaving in a way that looks distressed, confused, or afraid, and then it shows an empty car. That gap is why the video went viral. It is also why the video by itself cannot tell us what happened after she walked out of the frame. Police posted flyers. They canvassed. They asked anyone who recognized her to call. Her belongings were still at the hotel. The building had been searched to the limit of what detectives said they could do without probable cause to enter every room. Dogs had been on the roof. And still, and for 19 days, Elisa Lam was inside that hotel. Not in a room they had opened, in the water system. That is the fact that still stops people. Not because it proves a second person was involved, because it shows how a missing person search can pass over the one place a body actually is. By mid-February, guests were complaining about the water. Low pressure. Some later said the water looked or tasted wrong. On the morning of February 19th, a maintenance worker went up to inspect 4 large cisterns on the roof. Tanks of about 1,000 gallons each, feeding rooms, a kitchen, a coffee shop. The first tank was fine. The second was fine. He opened a hatch on another. Through that opening, he saw her. Elisa Lam's body was in the water, face up. The hatch, he said, was already open. The opening was too small to recover her. The tank had to be drained, then cut open. She was found unclothed. Clothing similar to what she wore in the elevator video was floating in the tank, along with a watch and a hotel room key. We are not going to linger on the remains. The image that matters is simpler and worse. A roof. 4 tanks. A search that had already been there. And a young woman who had been in the water the whole time guests were still using it. Now the questions, stated as questions, not as proof. How did she reach the roof? Main access was locked, staff only, and reportedly alarmed. Investigators and later reporting pointed to the fire escape as a way around those controls. Her scent, police said, was lost near a window that connected to it. After her death, video posted online showed the roof could be reached that way, and that tank lids were not all sealed shut. How did she get into the tank? The cistern sat up on blocks. Workers used a ladder. The lids were heavy. The employee who found her said the lid on that tank was open, which removes the internet's favorite impossible claim that she closed a heavy lid from inside. Why didn't the dogs find her? They searched but didn't alert to a body in a sealed water tank. That is a limitation of a search, not automatically evidence of a cover-up. What explains the elevator? The footage is real. The interpretation is not. Distress, a psychiatric crisis, fear of a person we cannot see. The tape supports more than one reading and confirms none of them. Unanswered is not the same as unsolved homicide. Hold that. It's the case. On February 21st, the first autopsy did not close the file. Toxicology was still pending. Investigators were still considering accident and the possibility of foul play. In June, the Los Angeles County coroner released the full report. Cause of death, drowning. Manner of death, accident. Significant contributing condition, bipolar disorder. No evidence of physical trauma. No evidence of sexual assault. No finding of suicide. Toxicology found her prescription medications at levels suggesting she had been under-medicating or had recently stopped. Over-the-counter medicine, a negligible amount of alcohol, no illicit drugs. The case that looked like a murder mystery had been classified as an accident. That does not mean every circumstantial question vanished. It means the medical evidence did not establish that another person put her in that tank. Impossible is not the same as proven. Theory A, homicide. The location is strange. The video is strange. The roof is restricted. The Cecil's history makes people reach for violence. Against it, the coroner's ruling, the absence of trauma, the absence of assault findings, no established second person on the tape, no charge, no identified killer. Unproven theory. B, suicide. The public asked. The coroner did not rule suicide. The report found no evidence of suicide. Her family said she had no history of attempts. Not the official finding theory. C, accidental drowning during a psychiatric crisis. This is the official conclusion. The proper version is not she was ill, therefore accident. It is. Investigators combine the physical evidence, drowning, no trauma, her clothing and key in the tank, with a documented medical condition, inconsistent medication, and a last recording consistent with acute distress. It is the explanation that fits the forensic file. It still does not reconstruct minute by minute how she climbed into a cistern. Official ruling, incomplete as a story. The internet added more. A horror movie coincidence. A game in an elevator. Claims the tape was edited. A hotel's century of crime, treated as if the building itself were a suspect. None of that is evidence of how Elisa Lam died. It is evidence of how a real death becomes a legend. The verdict. Elisa Lam's death is officially closed. The medical conclusion is accidental drowning. There is no established evidence that another person killed her. But the circumstances of her final movements remain difficult for many people to understand. And that's where the mystery survives. Not necessarily in the question of who killed Elisa Lam, but in the question of how the last hours of her life unfolded. From an elevator the whole world watched, to a tank nobody checked in time. Someone wanted answers from a few minutes of tape. The tape never had them. The coroner had a ruling. The roof still had a question. So, do you think the official conclusion explains what we saw in that elevator? Drop your verdict in the comments below. If you want to be there when the next case file opens, hit subscribe. Because history doesn't stop hiding things, and neither will we. Until the next case, keep questioning history